Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. Thanks so much for tuning in. I am so pleased to be joined once again by Marianne Williamson in the co-hosting chair. So nice to see you, Marianne.
Thank you, Robby. Nice to see you at this critical moment in our nation's history.
Very pivotal.
Very pivotal. What's on your radar today?
Happy to tell you. Well, major news broke yesterday. President Donald Trump announced he was moving closer to finally ending the awful war between Russia and Ukraine. Now, Trump wrote on Truth Social he had spoken with Russian President Vladimir Putin about bringing an end to this horrible conflict, which has resulted in thousands of unnecessary deaths on both sides. Trump said he agreed to visit Russia, and Putin agreed to visit the U.S. Trump said he would immediately be instructing Secretary of State Marco Rubio, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, and others to lead the negotiations that will bring this war to a close. Now, among the negotiators is Steve Witkoff, who played an important role in the negotiations with Benjamin Netanyahu, helping to arrange the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. It's good to have him on the team. Trump wrote, now, quote, "Millions of people have died in a war that would not have happened if I were president, but it did happen, so it must end. No more lives should be lost." Trump added he would speak immediately with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky about negotiating an end to this war. Trump reiterated his stance in a news conference when asked about whether Ukraine would be willing to make peace. Let's watch.
Do you view Ukraine as an equal member of this peace process?
It's an interesting question. I think they have to make peace. Their people are being killed, and I think they have to make peace. I said that was not a good war to go into, and I think they have to make peace. That's what I think.
And Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth offered more specific details on what he sees as Ukraine's future. Security guarantees from the U.S. and Europe, but no NATO membership. Let's listen.
The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5. There also must be robust international oversight of the line of contact. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine.
This is all just common sense. Ending the war means, look, Russia gets something it wants and Ukraine gets something it wants. It's obvious, and has been obvious since pretty much the start of this entire conflict, that Ukraine was never going to militarily defeat Russia despite unending support from the U.S. Now, since Ukraine's possible inclusion into NATO was one of the stated reasons for Russia's aggression, it makes sense to take that off the table. In fact, Ukraine's inclusion in NATO should have always been off the table. If the West had been clearer about that from the start, perhaps this war would have never happened. But here we are. We must live in the real world today. That means that Russia is likely to keep the territory it acquired during its conquest. In exchange for agreeing to end the war, Putin should promise not to take any more territory, with the explicit idea being Europe is committed to the defense of the remaining portion of Ukraine. And look, you don't have to like that deal in order to recognize that it's the best deal Ukraine is likely to get. As former Rising host Batya Ungar-Sargon pointed out on X, this is exactly the arrangement that those of us who have advocated for peace have anticipated would come to pass. Batya writes, "I am so relieved Trump is bringing the horrible bloodshed in Ukraine to an end. It looks like it will be resolved along the lines some of us were advocating before 1 million young men lost their lives. We were called Putin puppets for it. Under Trump, common sense has prevailed." Indeed. In fact, militarists are still smearing us, peace seekers, as Putin puppets. Anti-Trump pundit Alexander Vindman described the prospects of a peace deal as a, quote, "complete capitulation to Putin. This will embolden Putin and undermine the interests of peace in Ukraine and Europe, a major blow to U.S. national security." And Adam Schiff, Democratic lawmaker, called it a, quote, "surrender of Ukraine's interests and our own." Even before negotiations begin, Trump's a great deal maker, all right, for the Kremlin. These people, frankly, should be ignored. They had no deal, no plan whatsoever to stop the needless bloodshed in Ukraine. They had years to try. People are dying by the thousands. Now, in a perfect world, if we could wave a magic wand, would we want to keep all of Ukrainian territory part of Ukraine? Of course. But we don't have magic powers. We have to deal with the facts as they are. The fact is that a deal which involves Russia ending the war and agreeing not to conquer more Ukrainian territory is the best deal Zelensky is going to get if he wants to save the lives of his people, and he should. Democrats and pro-war Republicans are living in a fantasy land, utterly disconnected from reality. We may not like Putin. I don't. He may be a very bad guy. It's true. We still have to deal with him. We have to negotiate with him. We have to have diplomatic relations with him and other thugs around the world. Closing our eyes and pretending he doesn't exist is not a realistic foreign policy strategy. Pretending Putin doesn't exist, though, by the way, was former President Joe Biden's actual strategy. News broke yesterday that for 3 years, Biden never once spoke with Putin. As independent journalist Michael Tracy pointed out, that's crazy. Quote, "Whatever else is true, it's completely absurd that today is the first publicly acknowledged time that the U.S. and Russian presidents have spoken in 3 years. That alone is a significant shift and a common sense point for Trump. Common sense is back. Under Trump, the U.S. will pursue a foreign policy of realism and of peace." So look, Marianne, here we are. Hopefully this will bring an end to the conflict. And I know what a lot of people are going to say. We don't want to give Putin even an inch. And I get that thinking. I really do. But it's reality. And reality is Ukraine cannot continue to hold out against Russia, even with our support and even with our monetary aid. They're going to mow down all of their people. This is, I think, the best deal that there can possibly be to end the killing.
Well, Donald Trump tends to make the world what he wants it to be. He certainly has no problem bullying our allies like Mexico or Canada. But when it comes to Putin, hey, babe, let's talk. And Putin promises. I love how even when you just read what you just read, Putin promises. I think the American people need to understand how betrayed Ukraine has been by the United States in this situation, including from the very beginning. They will get a worse deal now than they would have gotten if they had never fought this war.
I agree with that. I agree with, yes.
So no one on either side of the political spectrum
we
should
gave
be
them hope that they could
self-congratulatory.
kick Russia out of their country. Well, here's money and weapons, and
Absolutely.
then of course that was going to run out eventually.
That part is true. Boris Johnson going there, the Naftali Bennett, etc. And this all had to do, the American people need to understand what happened here. Yes, we gave $177 billion, but that was mainly money to our own defense contractors. This was from the very beginning a scheme that had to do with the U.S. defense industry wanting to get rid of all that equipment so they could buy some more. And something you left out, Robby, was that the president is now saying that Ukraine owes us that $500 billion in rare earth minerals, which is really
maybe it was a loan.
So no. Painting. Whether it has to do with Gaza or with Ukraine, Donald Trump is going to come now and make the map the way he thinks it should be, calling this common sense. I call it his typical behavior at this point of carving out the planet the way he wants it to be. Does this war need to end? Yes. But do I trust the fact, for instance, he talked to Putin? Great. He didn't talk to Zelensky.
Well, he said he was going to call Zelensky next.
Yeah, right.
He picking up the phone.
He called Zelensky and told him what he and Putin had decided. And Zelensky is absolutely correct to say, excuse me, we're part of this conversation too. And Zelensky is talking more and more of that today.
But what about Biden only talking to Zelensky for years?
I don't disagree with you on that one. I don't disagree on that. You don't have, in order to disagree with Trump, that doesn't mean you have to agree with Biden. This was a scheme of the military-industrial complex from the very beginning. We exploited and we abused. Kissinger has a line, I heard Ryan Grimm say it the other day, that Kissinger had said, to be our enemy is dangerous, but to be our friend is deadly. We treated the Ukrainians terribly, and I just hope that the American people will understand this is just one more situation, just like Iraq, just like Afghanistan, and others, where the U.S. Military machine has gone in there at the expense of hundreds of thousands of people's lives, but it sold a lot of equipment and made a lot of money, and that's what really went on here.
Well, we're also going to have Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis on the show in just a little bit to see what he sees as the future for Ukraine and Russia. Can't wait for that. Stay tuned. We're continuing our conversation about the potential end to the war in Ukraine. Now, the worldview, according to President Donald Trump, is clearly different from his predecessor, Joe Biden. He is leaning into his ability to have conversations with President Vladimir Putin to try to end this senseless fighting in Ukraine. It is worth noting that Trump and Putin spoke for over an hour on Wednesday, while former President Biden, as I pointed out in my radar, had not spoken to the Russian leader in 3 or 4 years.
Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky clearly knows which way the winds of war are blowing. Simply put, if the U.S. withdraws support for Ukraine, Europe would not be able to fill the gap. Zelensky told the Guardian newspaper on Tuesday, quote, "There are voices which say that Europe could offer security guarantees without the Americans, and I always say no. Security guarantees without America are not real security guarantees." Reuters also quoted him as saying, "We, as a sovereign country, simply will not be able to accept any agreements without us."
So what is next? Here to unpack it all is retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. Thanks so much for coming back to Rising.
Always a pleasure to be here, Robby.
You were the first person I wanted to speak to after news broke yesterday that Donald Trump announced he had talked to Putin about a potential end to this war and would speak to Zelensky as well. Sounds to me like the deal they are working toward, one where Ukraine does not join NATO. Russia, unfortunately, keeps the territory it gained, but there's a guarantee of security for the rest of Ukraine, protection from Europe, that Russia can go no further. Is that ideal? Maybe not, but in reality, maybe the best thing that can possibly happen. Sounds very much along the lines that you and I have discussed on this show for years. What do you think?
Years, yeah, plural, yeah, from the beginning. We have talked about that. Though I would say people, even those in the Trump camp, need to be very careful about these comments about keeping a security guarantee for Ukraine, because they're asking for that, have been from the beginning. I'm not sure any nation on the planet, most least of all the United States, is going to put their security on the line to guarantee Ukraine's security. So I think that we need to look into the details a little bit about what people even think they mean when they say security guarantees, because frankly, there aren't any going to come, and the faster we recognize that reality as well, the quicker we're going to be able to get this to an end. Now, that is not to say that a negotiated settlement isn't possible, because it definitely is. The Russians have been signaling this literally from before the war and at every stage since that time, but it's going to have to be on something close to the terms they set. And here's the reason why, Robby. They have the military capacity. If they don't get a deal they want in negotiations, they can simply keep fighting until they gain everything by force of arms that they want.
And indeed, that could very well be the case. Now, of course, the implicit guarantee of security could be the incentive. If we certainly don't want U.S. troops on the ground there. There's got to be a limit to how much more money we possibly could give them. But if it's just, an understanding that Europe would step in if Russia went any further, so they know that, so they're not going to. So it's kind of like a mutual backing off. I think that would be okay.
Well, and you had Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth yesterday expressly say two of those very things you just mentioned here. There will be no American troops involved in any of this, and the Europeans themselves are going to have to pick up the lion's share of any kind of support going forward. Now, the good news is, and that's why I say it depends on how you define security guarantees. The good news is that their aim has been from the beginning that there will be no NATO on their western border in Ukraine or anywhere else. So they don't have any incentive to, for example, conquer all of Ukraine. Then they're right up on the border with NATO and all the NATO countries that currently exist. So they don't want that. What they want is a buffer between. They don't want, as has been comically claimed almost from the beginning by so many Western leaders, that Russia wants to reestablish the USSR and they want to go and conquer everybody. They don't want that. They want security on their border. If they can get it through negotiations, then that will provide guarantees, in a sense, security for the remainder of Ukraine, because Russia wants an independent Ukraine on its border between them and NATO. So as long as we understand how both sides define security, then we'll come faster to making a negotiated deal.
Lieutenant Colonel, thank you so much for being here with us. The only thing I don't understand about what you're saying is that we are theoretically here to honor Putin's desire for security, but somehow not particularly honor Zelensky's desire for security. I mean, if we actually look at the pattern of Putin's behavior, he goes, he takes what he wants, he comes back, and then he waits a while. And all that we're getting here is his promise. When actually, if you look at his pattern, it's reasonable to assume that he just might go take some more when he wants to. So I don't understand why it is that as Americans we're supposed to just assume that his promise is good enough and concern ourselves so much with understanding his security concerns and not the Ukrainians.
Yeah, two things. Number one, I would never advocate trusting Putin anywhere, not 1 inch anything, and there's no need to. We shouldn't take him at his word, but we have a powerful NATO on the border there, and as long as there is the Russian security has been established, and that's the key thing here. We're at a point, and I do want to make this point. It doesn't really matter what any of us think or want. It only matters what the balance of power between the two sides is, because war doesn't know anything about morality or what ought to be, et cetera. It only knows what is. And right now, the fact is that Russia has the balance of power irrevocably on its side. So if we don't acknowledge that, then we're not going to find a settlement that can at least be tolerable to the West and certainly to what's going to be remaining of Ukraine. But the second thing is that it is important to understand Russia has never said they want to conquer everything in Ukraine or to the West. They have always said they want security on their western border. And if we don't acknowledge what their security needs are, as well as what European security needs are, then we're never going to find an end. And that's why I say, if we don't acknowledge those realities, then eventually Putin can take it now all the way to the Dnieper River and possibly even into western Ukraine if it goes that far.
So many people, many Democrats, smearing those who are contemplating this deal as Putin puppets, saying that it's wrong to already agree to not permit Ukraine to join NATO without still negotiating that further or having that be, a bargaining chip to use later. To I guess steelman that argument, or I guess allow you the chance to address it. Sure. Why is that misguided? That even if we are going to make a deal, we shouldn't have committed already to say, yeah, they're not going to join NATO. We should have held out for more.
Well, yeah, and you see that being played out right now. Just a couple of hours ago, in the British press, Ben Wallace, former defense secretary, actually accused Secretary Hegseth of betraying Ukraine. Like you're basically handing over the keys. Just about what you're saying right there. Here's the problem with he is exposing Wallace is what the entire West, and you can go to Keir Starmer, you can go to Joe Biden, you can go to former Secretary of State Blinken, et cetera. All these, they have always said Ukraine is going to win. Ukraine is going to succeed. You've had retired general officers tell you that their 2023 offensive was going to succeed, and for all these reasons, and all of it was wrong. It was always wrong. And in my view, by refusing to make a deal with Russia before the war started in December 2021, by refusing to have an obvious, easy negotiated settlement that could have ended the war less than 2 months in April 2021 in 22 in Istanbul, they just said, no, we're going to keep fighting. And the result has been as predictable as it can. I've been on your show ever since this war started, telling you exactly how the military was going to work out, and it has. So you have these people who are making the claims that you just argued, saying that we should give up, but they're oblivious to the wreckage that has resulted. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian people are dead today because no one in the West would acknowledge basic balance of power dynamics and how wars are fought. And if the Trump administration appears that they're not going to follow that path and that they are going to try to get this over, if they don't, and if they continue following what the Ben Wallaces want to do, then you're going to see probably hundreds of thousands of more Ukrainian people die before this finally comes to an end.
Indeed. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for coming with us to give your take on the news. We appreciate
Always a
it.
pleasure, Robby. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Definitely wasn't your run-of-the-mill congressional hearing. We'll show you some of the highlights next from the DOGE hearing. Stay tuned. The House Subcommittee on DOGE had its first hearing yesterday, and Democrats seem to have one person on their minds. Guess who? Elon Musk. Let's take a look at some highlights.
While we're sitting here, Donald Trump and Elon Musk are recklessly and illegally dismantling the federal government, shuttering federal agencies, firing federal workers, withholding funds vital to the safety and well-being of our communities, and hacking our sensitive data systems.
Now, I find it ironic, of course, that our chairwoman, Congresswoman Green, is in charge of running this committee. Now, in the last Congress, Chairwoman Green literally showed a pic in our oversight congressional hearing. So I thought I'd bring one as well. Now, this, of course, we know is President Elon Musk. He's also the world's richest man. He was the biggest political donor in the last election. He has billions of dollars in conflicts of interest, and we know that he is leading a power grab, also abided by and encouraged by Donald Trump and, of course, the chairwoman, Congresswoman Green.
My eyes are rolling out of their sockets. Now, of course, Republicans had a defense of their own planned.
But the whole D.C. swamp is freaking out that the unelected officials from DOGE were allowed access to these systems. That makes no sense. Federal judges were not elected. The Treasury bureaucrats were not elected. And they have failed to fix the problem that is enabling American taxpayers to be robbed. So why not bring in skilled outside experts like private companies and private citizens who are successful in the real world to do everyday work that we need to get done here?
If Democrats really care about unelected bureaucrats making decisions over our lives, where were they whenever their god Anthony Fauci was forcing vaccine and mask mandates on the American people for 4 years during the during the COVID crisis? Where were they whenever unelected Alejandro Mayorkas was facilitating the invasion of our country by illegal aliens who were murdering and raping and pillaging our people?
Democrats, meanwhile, are trying to figure out a strategy to resist Musk and Trump's efforts. Some are even hinting that they'd allow a government shutdown. Here's Senator Andy Kim on Meet the Press on Sunday.
Are you prepared to shut down the government, to join Democratic colleagues who want to stand in the way of keeping the government open?
Well, you have to look at what the Trump administration is doing right now. They are simply trying to they are simply trying to dismantle the government. So yes, look, if we have to take steps to be able to hold them accountable, use the leverage that we have to force it, I cannot support efforts that will continue this lawlessness that we're seeing when it comes to this administration's actions.
House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, however, seems to have a different sentiment. Here he was last week.
I'm trying to figure out what leverage we actually have. What leverage do we have? Republicans have repeatedly lectured America. They control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. It's their government. What leverage do we have?
That's music to my ears. Daily Signal President Rob Bluey wrote on X, today's DOGE hearing was full of Democratic theatrics and anger toward Elon Musk. I wish those same lawmakers had the same passion for cutting wasteful government spending. It's our money, after all.
Former Rhode Island State Representative Aaron Regenberg wrote on X, Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer are architects of the crisis that allowed Trump's fascism to arise and succeed. They have zero credibility to be leading the fights we face today. Not in their record, their competency, or their recent performance, quite simply. They have to go.
Well, let's start there, Marianne, since you were someone running for a leadership position in the Democratic Party recently. They did not take you up on that effort. What do you make of the strategy right now among leaders of the Democratic Party to oppose or resist what Donald Trump and Elon Musk are doing?
Compare Hakeem Jeffries in that quote saying, I'm just trying to figure out what leverage we have. Can you imagine if Churchill had said that when Hitler was marching? Instead of never, never, ever give up, he said, I don't know, I'm trying to figure out what leverage we have.
I think they gave up.
Pardon?
I think they've given up.
Of course they would have given up. So no, it absolutely does not give any confidence to Democratic voters to hear Hakeem Jeffries talking about how he's trying to figure out what leverage. I agree with the gentleman from Rhode Island. I think that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and others who are of their ilk did create the big hole that this neo-authoritarian takeover has walked into, and I don't think that they are the generals that we need helping us right now.
Do you think it's the right strategy, though, to just utterly oppose or make fun of or snipe at everything Donald Trump and Elon Musk are doing? Look, cutting government waste, fraud, and abuse is a popular thing. Donald Trump couldn't have been clearer that what he was going to do this time, actually, I didn't believe him. That was my reluctance for Trump a second time around, was like, well, I've already seen this show and there was no cutting of government to speak of. I'm as shocked as anyone that they're actually doing it. I'm delighted. I'm never shocked in a positive direction about what happens in government, except for this moment in time. Do Democrats want to be the party that says, stop cutting so much government, stop getting rid of so many government employees? That's what they want to do?
That's not what we're saying. We're saying everything must be done within a democratic process.
All right.
You're saying this is exactly what Trump said he was going to do. No, it's not. He said that at the time, Ramaswamy and Musk were going to make recommendations.
Well, that's all they're doing.
No, they're not making recommendations.
And Trump's accepting their recommendations.
No, they are not. They are by decree going in there with a few computer guys. Excuse me, Musk is not an expert on government programs or on government itself. They're simply going into these computers, having fired the inspector generals who were put there by Congress in order to oversee. They're not learning about these programs. They're cutting out programs that give governmental grants, that give educational grants, that help children with autism and disabilities. They're cutting out grants that have to do with fighting malaria and tuberculosis. And they're calling this fighting corruption.
Well, we're pausing those and
Pardon?
looking at them.
Oh,
and
please.
those are going to be back real fast. Look, I agree that...
And they stopped funding public hospitals. Saying that this is rooting out corruption is a complete ruse. This is the money that they are saving here. Look what they did with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They're telling the American people.
So delighted to have that gone.
Fine, Robby,
It's the
because
greatest.
they cut out what they said. We cut out $700 million. But that bureau had given back $21 billion to consumers after those consumers had been frauded and abused by companies.
So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau says in their expertise, they say that those people are being defrauded. They punish the company. The companies pass on all of those costs to their consumers. Their very purpose and design is to make services that people want more expensive and more annoying.
Right.
I mean, I get that that's the progressive project, and that's why progressives are losing right now, because they're just out of touch with what the American people want. The American people don't want more regulation. They don't want businesses' lives to be more difficult, which ends up making everything more expensive. That's what they voted against.
So progressives do not want dictatorial decree by companies, which is what you're
This was
assuming.
dictatorial decree by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is not congressionally overseen at all.
What we do not want is dictatorial decree by Elon Musk. What we do not want is dictatorial decree by these people just going into computer systems, cutting out thousands and thousands of pages from websites. There is no recommendation going on here.
Was it dictatorial when they upgraded the healthcare website?
No, Robby.
That's what they're doing. They're doing a massive version of that to make government more efficient.
No,
and
this
Elon
is
Musk
not
is an
making
expert
government
at that.
more efficient.
He
This
is an expert at that.
dismantling government. This is gutting government
that's what
programs.
makes it more efficient.
And these government, but see, you said it yourself.
We're dismantling. I do want to dismantle.
You don't really like democracy. Democracy is messy.
No, I don't like government.
That's right. That's right. Thank you for admitting
don't like
it.
government.
Okay, everybody.
Who
you
likes
heard it.
government?
They don't like government.
But who likes
What they're
government?
trying to do is to dismantle the U.S. government, and that is the autocratic. That is the project going on here.
Autocracy is when you make the government more powerful and more...
It is an effort to make the American people distrust democracy. That's exactly what's going on here. And it's supposed to be governance according to corporate profit. That's what's going on here. Taking all interest on behalf of the public sector and putting it in the hands of the private sector. You said it yourself, which is fine for a few people. You and I will do pretty well. 20% of Americans will do very well. But marginalized people, people who do not have the skills that they need, they do not have the health care that they need, they do not have the education that they need in order to thrive, well, they'll just have to do away. So forget government of the people, by the people, and for the people.
More money on education.
That's why we should have
so many other
Medicare for all.
countries, and it doesn't. But we don't get better. We don't get better outcomes. We're getting rid of the education
We would with
department,
Medicare for all.
But we're not. Let's just use the education funding as an example. We're going to get rid of the education department, but we're not going to get rid of public funding for education. We're just going to say this massive federal bureaucracy that has not improved reading and math scores in the entire time it's existed, maybe that is not necessary. We're still going to pay. We're still going to provide education. I was being a little bit flippant earlier, but I agree that there's a purpose for government, and there will be accommodations made for the less fortunate, and there will be some government funding of services.
Where do you get this? There will be accommodations made for the less fortunate. Then why are you getting rid right now of the Department of Education?
Because we're no longer going to view the federal government as a jobs provider for federal employees, which is the way the government is treated. We don't have to have government administer services that the private market can provide much more cheaply and much more efficiently. We can still pay for it with taxpayer dollars, as we're going to do for education. We're still going to pay for people to go to school. But does the federal government, this awful, bloated monstrosity, need to oversee every detail of education? Actually, I think even people on the left should say no.
The Department of Education is run by the states.
Yeah.
The Department of Education is not transgressing against that. We're talking about things that have to do with helping children with autism, helping children with disabilities. We're talking about helping the people who have the least ability to help themselves. And no, the private market is not going to step in and do that. No, it's not going to. And when you talk about taking on government corruption, fine. I'll tell you who's laughing right now are the lobbyists and the corporate lawyers and lobbyists here in Washington, D.C. You want to take on corruption, take on the insurance companies, take on the pharmaceutical companies, take on big food, big chemical, big agricultural companies, big oil companies. You want to get rid of bloat? You get rid of those multi-billion-dollar corporate subsidies to big oil that's already making billions. Well, why are you going after the little things that actually help people?
Farm subsidies, energy subsidy. I want to get rid of all subsidies. I've never met a subsidy I didn't want to destroy on site. So I'm with you on that.
If that's what Elon Musk was after, really getting rid of corruption, that's where you go. Getting rid of the programs that help the most marginalized, powerless people in our society is not getting rid of corruption.
That's not everything.
This is gaslighting.
I'm sure
this is tyranny by gaslighting, and that is straight out of the playbook of autocratic takeovers everywhere.
And that's what's going on. When we're getting rid of USAID funding to do, like, I don't know, drag performances in the Middle East or something.
Some of that. I'm not saying in any of these programs that recommendations should not have been reasonable. But that is very different. Recommendations, you talk to all of the people, you understand what all of the projects are, then you go back to Congress. That's called the democratic process.
I agree with that.
Then Elon Musk going in there with his little geek goons, and going into the computers, taking out what he doesn't want. Let's not forget his own $400 million contract for armored Teslas. That's a whole other conversation.
When we get to
why do we need armored Teslas? His something like $18 billion worth of government contracts over the last few years. And when Trump was asked about that, what about conflict of interest? Isn't that corruption? Which, by the way, inspectors general in several of these agencies had been looking into right before they were scrapped by Elon Musk. But Trump said he'll self-monitor. Trump said he'll self-monitor everyone, so we don't have to worry about.
I agree with you that when we get to
because Elon Musk will make sure that he's a good guy.
I agree with you when we get to the defense part of this and the contracts. We will be paying a lot of attention, and I agree.
And so who's going to be overseeing Elon Musk and his contracts? Can you tell me?
I think Elon Musk.
Elon Musk. Okay, that's corruption.
I don't think that part of it.
That's corruption.
Well, I'm not defending every aspect of this. I agree with you. That's a problem, and they've said there's going to be
called
defense.
Destroying democracy and replacing it with autocracy, where they get to do whatever they want to do, but they'll tell you they're getting rid of corruption. Straight out of the playbook, Robby. You should be concerned. If you're a real conservative, you should be concerned.
I said I
All
am
Americans should be concerned. We like our democracy no matter what side of the political spectrum.
Well, I like democracy, but I don't fetishize democracy because I don't fetishize democracy because there can be bad outcomes that come out of democracy. Right?
That's what makes it messy. That's the conversation that needs to be had. It is messy, and that's why every American needs to be involved in the process. This is where we should be looking at the part that has been played by legislators on both sides of the aisle because of the undue influence of all that corporate and donor money that has been making them spend all that money in a corrupt way.
We'll continue this conversation in just a minute. We got to take a quick break. We've got a guest waiting in the wings. Coming up on Rising, we'll also discuss Tulsi Gabbard swearing in and how those in the political world were reacting to that. Trump administration celebrated a victory yesterday. Tulsi Gabbard was sworn in as the new director of national intelligence. Lawmakers nominated her with a 52-48 vote, mostly along party lines. Senator Mitch McConnell was the only Republican to vote against her confirmation. Here are some remarks from Gabbard and Trump yesterday.
Unfortunately, the American people have very little trust in the intelligence community, largely because they've seen the weaponization and politicization of an entity that is supposed to be purely focused on ensuring our national security.
Throughout her service, Tulsi has always distinguished herself as a leader of the highest caliber. She's earned the respect and admiration and love of Americans on both sides of the aisle as her profound commitment to the values that keep us free, and she really does have those values as much as anybody. In recent years, Tulsi has been a courageous and often lonely voice speaking out against radical left's attacks on free speech and the dangers of an unelected deep state.
Leading up to her confirmation, Gabbard faced criticism from both sides of the aisle. Some lawmakers were concerned about her past opposition to Section 702 of FISA, which expanded surveillance authority and intelligence gathering from overseas. Gabbard's apparent sympathy for whistleblower Edward Snowden was also a contentious issue.
Her meeting with former Syrian dictator Bashar Assad was also a hot topic for some lawmakers, as was her skepticism as to whether Assad had used chemical weapons. Now, there are those who accuse Gabbard of repeating Russian propaganda about the war in Ukraine. Speaking of which, here is former UN Ambassador John Bolton on CNN last night. Let's watch.
Well, I think Putin couldn't be happier. I tell you, they're drinking vodka straight out of the bottle in the Kremlin tonight. It was a great day for Moscow. I think Tulsi Gabbard's role as Director of National Intelligence is going to be extremely harmful to our national security. I think many allies are now going to think twice before they share intelligence with us. I think it'll impair our ability to gain confidence around the world. It was one of his worst nominations, beyond a doubt.
Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer wrote on Blue Sky, "On the night that Putin invaded Ukraine, what was Tulsi Gabbard doing? Spending her energy blaming NATO and the U.S. for what Putin did. Tulsi Gabbard is not qualified to lead America's intelligence community."
Former New Hampshire congressional nominee Lily Tang Williams, on the other hand, wrote next, "War is the last resort, not the first." Well said, Tulsi Gabbard. Shame on Democrats who voted no on the party line to confirm a former Democrat who's for peace. Dems have become a party of endless wars and corruption. Hashtag walk away. Even Bernie Sanders, whom Tulsi formerly supported very vehemently, did not vote to confirm her for this role. Look, I don't agree with everything Tulsi has said and done over the years. Actually, one of the concerns I have is it's like the opposite. They wanted her to be more for Section 702 FISA surveillance. They wanted her to denounce Edward Snowden. Like, I liked her initial stance of thinking warrantless surveillance of American people is bad. I liked her initial stance of Edward Snowden is a hero for revealing that your government was lying to you about all that. So I certainly hope she doesn't get captured by the deep state, but maybe she's just saying what she needs to say in order to get confirmed. Putin puppet, drinking vodka. The vodka sounds nice. I'll take a shot of that. Other than that, very irritating commentary to me.
Well, the fact that the fact that the American defense establishment, foreign policy establishment that gave us Iraq, that gave us Afghanistan, that gave us the far-right extremist government in Israel, the adherence to their policies no matter what. The fact that they don't like her, I don't care. The fact that she's a break from the past and what they call taking care of America's security interests, I don't have a problem with that. I'm still open on this, however, because, if you say that somebody's smashing an old establishment that needs to be smashed, that doesn't necessarily mean that what they're going to give us is anything better. Mm-hmm. So I agree with a couple of things that you said, but I'm a still wait and see with Tulsi does going forward.
Well, I think,
we don't know. That's sort of the issue with a lot of these.
Wait and see is a good attitude for government appointees or political appointees in general. We'll see what they do, and if they do things I don't agree with, I'll criticize them. But
because you and I don't have to make the vote.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I would have certainly voted to confirm her, especially versus other people that Trump could have picked in that role, that more establishment, somebody who meets Mitch McConnell's approval is going to be someone who is probably going to be an advocate for a more militaristic or strained relationship with Russia or in other countries around the globe. And I just don't think that's the right way to do diplomacy.
Well, when it comes to the defense establishment, the foreign policy establishment in general, they're posing like the adults in the room when, as I said, they have given us these horrible foreign wars.
And they get everything wrong.
That's right.
Over and over again.
So the American people have a right to say, we think we're going to try a different direction now. However, then the question becomes, what is that different direction? Certainly with Trump, most things I don't agree with that different direction, and with Tulsi, we'll see.
What do you think about the loss of faith that Americans have suffered in their intelligence agencies and law enforcement overall? Because there's both a left and a libertarian critique of these systems that's existed for years and years and years, and now more and more people are embracing it. And I think that's a good thing. Now, I think automatically being opposed to every institution, no matter what, can also create paranoia and unhealthiness, but
Thank you, Robby.
a certain amount of skepticism and criticism and independent thinking and a tendency to go, okay, well, why are you telling me this and what's your agenda here is so helpful. And I think the American people have broadly woken up to that when it comes to some of these agencies and institutions.
I think healthy skepticism about government in general is a requirement for good citizenship.
Yes.
I don't care what your politics are. Nobody should just slavishly assume that you're doing the right thing, which is the argument I'm telling you about Musk and about Trump. I don't care who the president is. I don't care what party. We shouldn't just say, well, if you say so, it must be true. I think it's tragic that the American people have lost the level of faith that we have lost in the American foreign policy establishment. And once again, look how many millions of people have died because of it.
Yes.
We're not just talking about American deaths, we're talking about Iraqis and so forth.
Horrible. Destabilized the entire Middle East. And for what? Did it make us safer? Of course not. And we lost our people. You know, it's not even like, well, we just made them pay this horrible price. Ha, 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 we're better off. We're not better off. They're not better off, and we're not better off. So it's time for some different thinking.
There is some time for different thinking, but then you look at something like the president's plan for Gaza.
Yeah.
That, to me, is not enlightened common
That's a bad
sense
plan. Well,
new
we're all against that plan.
Good.
I'm so against it, and I think it's so obviously dumb that I don't actually think they're going to do it. But I think
but
it's a
he
recycled
will
Jared
try
Kushner
to do it,
idea.
won't he?
I don't know. Nobody wants it. Even Lindsey Graham doesn't want to do it, and Lindsey Graham
Even
wants to.
Lindsey Graham standing up to Donald Trump.
He said, "I don't." Well, let's not go that far.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know about this one. Maybe we gotta,
It's a terrible
put
idea.
this back in the ideas drawer.
It's a terrible idea. A man who is so big on saying nobody can mess with what Americans want has no problem saying that we can mess with what the people of Gaza want.
Yeah.
So
we should not do that.
Yeah.
No more conquest.
Yeah.
Coming up on Rising, we'll be discussing unemployment fraud. The question is, can anything be done about it? Stay tuned. During COVID, many people found themselves out of work. The government stepped in, raised the amount of unemployment benefits it dispersed, and also the number of people who could receive those benefits.
Let's remember that was during President Trump's first term.
And as with so many government benefits comes fraud. Experts say there's some $135 billion in COVID unemployment fraud that needs to be recovered. Now, the problem is the statute of limitations is up in March. Here with us to discuss is Stewart Whitson. He's an Army combat veteran, former FBI supervisory, special agent, and an attorney. He testified on the Hill this week to try to get the deadline extended and is with us now to explain more. Welcome to Rising.
Thanks for having me on.
So tell us, give us a sense of how big a problem this is and what this looming deadline means for recovering these funds.
Well, as you know, so obviously the DOGE effort has launched an unprecedented campaign to identify waste and fraud. And so one of the biggest areas where a tremendous amount of waste has occurred is during COVID with unemployment insurance being stolen by fraudsters. And so the full scope of the problem, you're looking at $135 billion of stolen funds just during those years. But get this, of the $135 billion, only $6.8 billion has been recovered. So that's basically 5%. So what does that mean? That means for every dollar stolen, only 5 cents has been recovered. And so, when you try to look at the picture and figure out why, I think for a lot of people, it's pretty clear the DOJ has been focused in other areas it shouldn't be. So obviously focus was on President Trump. Focus was on, parents at school board meetings. Focus was on Catholics practicing their faith. And so with a new leadership in place, with new folks at DOJ and FBI, there's a big opportunity to go after all this fraud. But there's one big problem, as you mentioned, the statute of limitations is actually going to run out in a few weeks. Good news is there's an easy fix.
And how does this fraud typically work? Is this the case of people filing for unemployment benefits when they have not actually lost their job as a result of COVID, or that they hadn't lost their job at all and they got the benefits anyway? How does this particular fraud work?
Well, a few different ways. One way will be, exactly as you said, they actually have a job on the side and they don't claim that, and so they go ahead and double dip and get the benefits. The other way it'll happen is across state lines. So, claiming benefits in one state while also claiming benefits in another state. A third way it'll happen is with transnational organized crime. And so stealing people's ID, those kind of things, and filing false claims to obtain money that way.
The question I have is that the whole issue of these PPE loans and so forth, and the fraud and the lost money, this was a conversation we were having years ago. Why is it that all of a sudden now, when the statute of limitations is about to be up or is passed, that it's coming up now? What is your feeling about why this wasn't looked into and handled, and also why it even happened the way it happened to begin with? Where was the dysfunction in our government that this was even allowed to occur, and why didn't they get on top of it sooner?
Well, I think, so obviously COVID presented an unprecedented, situation. So we never faced anything like that. And so 23 million Americans were suddenly pushed out of the workforce, and massive amounts of government funding had to then go to those people to help them get by. And that was understandable. But a couple problems happened. Whenever that much money is being pushed out and shared by the government, criminal organizations immediately go after it. And the reason they do is they know that if they steal from the government will just continue funding the program. The government will never run out of money, unlike other targets. And so the government makes a lucrative target in these type of environments. And they also know in this type of environment that the government, especially initially on, and rightfully so, is going to be very laser focused on getting benefits to people and not as much worried about stopping fraud. But unfortunately, the second part of the problem is that once COVID had the country kind of gained control of COVID, we started to return to normal. There was a hesitation by the Biden administration to lift the public emergency. And so for a long amount of time, funds were continuing to flow out to people. There was less oversight, and so that just kind of exacerbated the problem. And then the last kind of thing I kind of alluded to briefly is DOJ has just not been focused on this problem. And so they've got a team, I'm sure, of solid investigators working this, but like anything, resources are confined and they can only be pushed to wherever the current executive branch wants those resources pushed. And so as we saw in the news, and it's been well documented and well reported, most of that focus was going to things that can't be described in any other way than the politicization and weaponization of the DOJ to go after the Biden administration's political opponents. We saw that with President Trump, with unprecedented lawsuits and court filings that were waged against him. We saw it against school board, parents going to school board meetings, getting targeted by the FBI.
Yeah.
Then we saw it against Catholics doing nothing more than practicing their faith, they too being targeted. And so if resources are focused on that, they're not focused on where they should be, which is fraud. And so the reason this is important now is because in mere weeks from now, the statute of limitation will run out. And so what that means is even if these investigators have collected evidence, and they've got a pretty solid case on a bad guy, and that investigation essentially ends because the ability to bring that charge in court ends with the statute of limitations.
Who was supposed to be watching out to make sure these payments were being given correctly in the first place? I asked that because, Marianne mentioned the PPE loans. There was also, billions of dollars given, for instance, to schools to upgrade their facilities, supposedly so they could reopen and get kids back in, make sure there was proper ventilation, things of that nature. And then districts got billions in funding and then didn't use it. It's just, they didn't use it to change anything. Which is this massive scandal that we appropriate money and then they didn't even spend it. We're having trouble, I think, even understanding what agencies in government are funding what. So we're going through USAID and what various things it's funded. We recently discussed like a Wuhan Eco Health Alliance grant that they got. I was like, wait a minute, I thought NIAID was the group doing that. At least they provide oversight. Who was supposed to be providing oversight for these things? And do we have a problem where there's just too many different agencies doing similar work and they think, oh, you're the ones doing the monitoring when actually it's supposed to be us doing it?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of the problem, but you kind of alluded to a second part of the problem. So you've got this big, the fraud going on. There's responsibilities from state entities and federal entities. But they do have to kind of work together because a lot of this criminal activity happens over state lines. And so it's not easy to just leave it to the states to kind of track these folks down if it's criminal organizations operating across the country or across borders. So that's kind of a problem. But the other part of this that you alluded to, which is really important, is so much money was pushed out to the American people that maybe wasn't needed or maybe wasn't used. And so that's a lot of this money too. There's other avenues besides just going after the fraud and extending the statute of limitations. There also could be potential avenues to try to recoup some of those unused funds from businesses. And that's not to suggest that any of the businesses in this second case have violated the law or anything. They just took money that the government was offering them to use. And then if it turned out they did not need to use that money, then there's probably a good argument to be made that they should return that money. And so there may be some avenues for that as well.
Thank you so much for joining us to discuss this important issue. We really appreciate it.
Yep, thanks for having me.
When it comes to our national security, there's no question that the Chinese Communist Party is at the top of our adversaries list. They're working to become a global superpower. According to the FBI, China has tried to influence our lawmakers and also public opinion. They've also been accused of stealing intellectual property and committing cyber attacks. It appears the CCP is still employing these kinds of tactics. The Daily Caller News Foundation's Phil Lenczycki is out with a new story titled, quote, "A defense contractor that supplies parts for American military aircraft and advises the U.S. government on supply chain security is owned by an immigrant with extensive ties to the Chinese Communist Party, intelligence, and influence agencies," according to a Daily Caller News Foundation investigation. The name of the person in question is Jerry Wang, the CEO of S&L Aerospace Metals. S&L specializes in making things like landing gears and hydraulics. They serve clients like Boeing, Lockheed, and Raytheon. They work on both commercial and military aircrafts. Joining us now to discuss is Phil Lenczycki, who writes the Department of Defense has awarded tens of millions of dollars in defense contracts for fighter jet attacks, helicopters, and guided missile launcher parts to S&L Aerospace Metals, a New York-based company that serves on the Department of Homeland Security on critical manufacturing. Phil is here with us, as I just said. Thank you for coming on Rising.
Thanks for having me so much. Yep.
So how does a person like this with ties to our adversaries end up working so close with important military private companies that provide military contracts for military equipment? That seems like a major red flag.
That's really the million-dollar question: is how could this have happened? The individuals with whom we spoke told us that essentially the Department of Defense, the vetting process for defense contractors boils down to little more than the honor system. It's a self-disclosure system in which these defense contractors will, identify their own potential vulnerabilities. And after that, there's maybe just a perfunctory, cursory review of those disclosures, and then they are let into the system.
My head pretty much exploded just now when you said that the vetting process amounts to little more than the honor system. This is not a red flag. This is like 5 to 10 red flags. The fact that people who have to do with manufacturing parts, that our military, our young men and women are going to be flying these planes. And the fact that they could be sabotaged so easily, this is absolutely horrific. And the fact that it took the Daily Caller to find it out also says a lot. So thank you for exposing such profound malfunction and danger within an institution, which, as we've talked about, there's a lot of diminished respect for anyway.
A lot of diminished respect for Boeing right now. Can you talk about that specific connection?
Yes, exactly. And so this company, S&L Aerospace, produces for Boeing, both for its military aircraft as well as for, the 747. And so this is certainly a concern, as we've seen Boeing struggle recently and mishaps. So there's no evidence that would suggest that S&L, any of its parts, were connected to any of these mishaps, but the concern certainly is there given what we've seen.
And we know also that the Chinese Communist Party causes basically self-censorship among American companies or American professional athletes that want to play in Chinese markets. They know not to speak up or talk back to Chinese authorities. Isn't that a danger here as well, that someone involved in such an important level with American business interests and things for the military is compromised in that way?
Well, certainly, were it to come to that this individual was required to give input, then that would be an issue. And given that his company is on the Department of Homeland Security's Critical Manufacturing Sector Coordinating Council, they are certainly privy to privileged information, according to the intelligence analyst with whom we spoke, and would be called upon at times to cooperate with the government and help advise them about how to protect U.S. critical manufacturing. So in that regard, to your point, I suppose they could hypothetically be guided by directives or the agenda from Beijing.
For something that is absolutely as essential as this is to American national security, it's shocking to me to hear all the distrust given to these guys. There's a great naivete, it seems to me, on the part of our defense establishment, like you said, making it just the honor system. You say what part of things he's involved in. The point is, if his foot is in the door. The point is, and I'm not saying the United States doesn't do its own shenanigans and its own spying other places, because we know that we do. But I assume those other countries are a little more careful about us. We should be as careful about them as they are certainly careful about us. So once again, thank you for exposing this. I find this just outrageous.
And we should note that through an attorney, he denied to you that he does have ties to foreign political entities. What is your basis for determining that this individual is indeed potentially compromised, or at least does have associations with our Chinese adversaries?
Correct. The attorney in SNL denied that he had ties to any political entities of a foreign power. However, when presented with approximately 13 photos showing Mr. Wong at a series of events, both in the United States and in China, meeting with Chinese Communist Party officials, including Xi Jinping, as well as Chinese intelligence officials, the SNL and the attorney did not deny that Mr. Wong was pictured in those photos. And so not only do we have evidence from these photos, but we also have Chinese government and Chinese state media reports that list Mr. Wong as being an official within a number of Chinese intelligence agencies, and as well a Chinese government organization known for influence.
That seems pretty
in order here, guys.
Is Congress at all interested in looking at how these contracts are made to someone like this?
Well, I'm happy to say that the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, they commented. Representative John Molinar, the chairman, he expressed concern about this topic. And we're waiting and hoping that other members will look into this. And we're waiting to hear if any of the affected agencies wish to, investigate the matter. And we've reached out to, for instance, Lockheed Martin to ask if they would be looking into this.
Phil, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up on Rising, the notorious Jeffrey Toobin has made a new career move. We'll discuss. Here's a name you probably haven't heard in a while, and that name is Jeffrey Toobin. Yes, that Jeffrey Toobin, CNN's chief legal analyst, will be also joining the New York Times opinion section.
Dylan Byers of Puck first reported the news. Toobin has become notorious for an incident in October of 2020. During that time, Toobin was on a Zoom call with his colleagues at The New Yorker.
While on the Zoom call, you all know what happened. Toobin and his colleagues taking a break from the meeting. Toobin then exposed himself, and I'm going to read this on television, began masturbating. Toobin says he thought he had turned his camera off, did not intend for his coworkers to see that. The New Yorker ultimately fired Toobin. CNN put him on leave for 8 months, but then did bring him back. Here he was addressing the incident on CNN in 2021.
To quote Jay Leno, what the hell were you thinking?
Well, obviously, I wasn't thinking very well or very much. And, you know, I have spent the 7 subsequent months, miserable months in my life, I can certainly confess, trying to be a better person. I mean, in therapy, trying to do some public service, working in a food bank, which I certainly am going to continue to do, working on a new book about the Oklahoma City bombing, but I am trying to become the kind of person that people can trust again.
Luckily for Toobin, the New York Times thinks he's trustworthy now. Dan McLaughlin of National Review wrote on X, image of the New York Times opinion page as an exercise in self-pleasuring just got a lot less metaphorical. Keep them coming. Conservative columnist Christian Schneider chimed in writing, stroke of genius. Tablet Magazine's Armin Rosen wrote, please, Time staffers, control your enthusiasm on this one. A lot of other funny things I saw on social media. I asked you before we started recording this, Marianne, if you were familiar with the underlying incident, and you were. Look, I was actually in a very just all by myself place of, I hate when people get fired for, I don't know, I feel bad for people. I felt embarrassed for him because it's so humiliating. But also, what the F, dude? Like, you just gotta, you gotta watch out for that stuff.
Well,
I mean,
the boys protect the boys here, so he'll get his job back. It's all one big club, and
he got his job back and then a promotion.
Media. Yeah. So that's what, and you're right. I mean, he's so humiliated himself, and so that's certainly how much more punishment. I just think it's odd that he wants another public role.
Yeah, I'd want to go somewhere and die.
But he's in the club, and once you're in the club, they protect you. If you're not in the club and they don't want you, they have a way to make sure that you never even get a chance again.
CNN's decision to bring him back and then make him address it on television was, in my view, one of the most bizarre decisions ever made, because then he's saying, like, oh yeah, I got therapy and now I'm giving to charity. How is that responsive to the nature of your indiscretion whatsoever? Like, you accidentally masturbated on camera, dude. That's not really a therapy issue.
No, it's just a moment of
Am I wrong?
Stupidity and
yeah.
Like, I don't even want to go there.
Yeah,
I
didn't even want to talk about it, but it's so funny, and people are making all these hilarious jokes about it. I'm not sure, also I don't know what is so indispensable about his commentary that he is like the only person who can offer very, I would say, tired and familiar anti-Trump bromides. I see why that's the New York Times favorite thing.
That's what surprises me, too. These legacy media corporations are only making themselves look like fools.
Yes.
Why would they so allow the diminishment of their own
making themselves look like jerk-offs?
Pardon?
Making themselves look like jerk-offs?
He said it. I didn't say that stuff. That's him. This little boy stuff, right?
It's bad times. We've been talking about on Rising a lot, just bad times for CNN in general, or for mainstream media, for cable news. The audience isn't there. The kind of spike they got years ago when they leaned hard into Trump resistance and, hair on fire kind of coverage, that lifted them a little bit during Trump's first term. Trump was good for the mainstream media. Their whole business model revolved around scaring you about him. This time, he's actually doing, for or against, I'm broadly for it, you're broadly against it. He's actually doing much more dramatic things this time around. The media is not, I don't think, shrieking as much about Trump as they were last time, because they just don't think that's going to be good for business. Now, they haven't found out a better business model. They're just kind of flailing.
Hold on. It's called obedience in advance. When ABC paid those multi-million dollars, what was it, $15 million to him, in a case that they would have won.
But they didn't do that last time.
No,
what explains the difference?
Well, explain the difference is that they know at this point, this, once again, Robby, this is an autocratic, authoritarian takeover, and everybody is just folding. Everybody's just caving. Now, you said something a minute ago. You said they have to figure out a better business model. This has been the corruption of America over the last few decades. News is not supposed to be a business model. It's supposed to be a journalistic model first, and that's what has gotten us in large part to where we are, whether it has to do with Fox, whether it has to do with MSNBC, whether it has to do with CNN. The idea that people have decided their attitude, have decided decided whether to be against him or for him based on how much money they will make, based on who will be their sponsors. That is part of what has corrupted the American public sphere and made Americans not know what to think. It's what made Americans, when you talked about Americans not trusting our institutions, they don't trust legacy media. We don't have any Walter Cronkites anymore.
But then how do you explain, I agree with a lot of points of that, although even in the Walter Cronkite era, I sometimes think the trust in media was misplaced even in that era, and that you could get away with a lot, you could manufacture great consensus for foreign policy blunders when you had less competition in the media environment.
Although, if I may, when Walter Cronkite said what he said about the Vietnam War, Lyndon Johnson said, that's the day I lost the war. That's the day I lost it, because Walter Cronkite said it. And I think that
eventually the media turned on the war, but did it provide too much cover initially?
Well, I think at that point there was, much as you said, manufactured consent. However, in those days, you didn't have reporters being simply stenographers for the Pentagon. Today, reporters within the legacy media have become so lazy, and they'll just they're going to just report whatever Pete Hegseth says. I don't care if it's a Democratic or a Republican establishment. When you look at something like the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, both kinds of presidents, both parties completely misled us, and a large part of that was because legacy media reporters did not do their jobs, and the American people have a right to be very distrustful of that. But the point is that it's very dangerous for the United States.
The legacy media cared more about Pete Hegseth's dating history than what his views on foreign policy.
Well, this wasn't dating. Rape is not. When someone is accused of rape, it's not just dating. He was accused of assault.
Well, it wasn't just that. It was the
Hello?
affairs and all of that became part of the media
well, I remember
circus.
a time.
I think it's fair.
I remember when the Republicans were the ones who said character matters.
Well, character. I think I want to know what your policy views are. If you're in a policy role, I don't really care.
Well, don't you think, though, that the Department of Defense should be led by someone who's had experience in that particular field? What's going on here is when people say, well, Kash Patel or
Kash Patel has experience.
These people are considered by many to be unqualified for these positions, and what we have to understand is that Trump doesn't want qualified people.
Kash Patel was a
he
defense.
Just wants them to take orders from the Oval Office.
Kash Patel, I'm very defensive of Kash Patel. I think that's the one that has been unfairly attacked the most. I understand why there was scrutiny of Pete Hegseth for not having run a similarly large organization before, but Kash Patel actually has history as a on the defense side of prosecutions, and I think that would be so valuable for looking, because the prosecutors, the law enforcement, the justice system has so much power, and lefty people agree with this, so much power to grind you down that I think it's helpful to have someone in that role who has some understanding of what it's like to be on the other side. So
let's go back just for one moment to Hegseth. You said he has not run anything near, millions of people work for the Pentagon. So yes, he has not run anything close to that. He's run a small nonprofit at which he was accused of embezzlement, Robby.
Well, he was accused anonymously. So people then came forward on the record to say he actually did a great job.
What's going on here is that President Trump likes the fact that Pete Hegseth can go out there like a Fox reporter and just report the news. Even like when you heard, even the quote that we had of him here talking about Ukraine, those were not his words. He was just reading from a script. It's so obvious that all of this, everything in the government, they want to be run from the Oval Office, and once again, that's not how a democracy is supposed to work.
We got to some serious debate, starting off with the most ludicrous subject for this this block of TV. Breaking news on Rising: the Senate has voted to confirm Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be the next Health and Human Services Secretary. As with Director of Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, the vote was mostly along party lines. Mitch McConnell was the sole Republican once again to vote against Kennedy, as he was for Tulsi Gabbard. Kennedy will oversee agencies like the CDC, the NIH, and the FDA. Trump Deputy Rapid Response Director Greg Price wrote on X, "From henceforth, all food at the grocery store containing seed oils will be required to display pictures of RFK Jr.'s disapproving face." I think that's a joke, but a funny one nonetheless. The Libertarian Party, my people, celebrated the news, writing in a press release, "Last year, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. became a lifetime member of the Libertarian Party. During ongoing relationship building with the Libertarian base, Mr. Kennedy was an attendee and a speaker, and also a late presidential nominee at our convention. Today, he became the first Libertarian Party member to become head of a U.S. Department of Health and Human Services under President Donald Trump. So, Kennedy confirmed. I think that was widely expected at this point. It was going to be interesting to see, like with Gabbard, you know, he's a former Democrat or formerly on the Democratic side, so it was going to be interesting to see if that worked either way to attract some Democratic support or potentially some Republican lack of support. You know, he's someone who has very socially progressive views on abortion, for instance. I thought maybe there was going to be pro-life Republicans voting against him. But we just had Mitch McConnell voting against him. No Democrats voting for him, but he is easily confirmed.
You know, I know Bobby. I don't know him really well, but I have certainly supported, until now, this confirmation. I have thought that he brought some really good conversations. However, what's happening for me at this point is that all of this is secondary to the larger picture of the authoritarian takeover that is happening in the U.S. government at this point, what Musk and Trump are doing. So I hoped in vain that Bobby would say, you know what, this is too much for me. I cannot be part of this. I happen to know about a meeting that he had with a U.S. senator in which the senator said, okay, so fine about your health views. What if Trump stages an all-out autocratic takeover of the U.S. government? What would you do? And reportedly, Kennedy said, well, he's the president. I can't go along with that. We need some American patriots at this time to say that what is happening is illegal, it is unconstitutional, and it must not stand. No man is meant to be above the law, regardless of that horrible decision by the Supreme Court. And the president is duly elected, and I respect that, but he and Musk must act within the confines of the law.
I agree. Of course they must. And Donald Trump has said, well, of course we will obey. We will, if we get unfavorable court decisions, we will file appeals, but that's how it's supposed to work. We are not at the point, you know, I think you're trotting out the autocracy crisis stuff a little early.
That doesn't mean it's not.
Has he ignored?
The time to do it is right now.
Before
and
he's
by the way,
working through the court, he hasn't ignored any court decisions. Court's going to say no, yes to some of this, no to other things. Then they're going to try different ways, including with legislation, which I encourage them to do. I say this every day on this show. Can't do everything via executive order. Republicans control the Congress. Put some of the. If you don't want to spend this money that Congress appropriated, there's a process for that. It's called rescission. You send it back to them. They vote again, and then you don't spend the money. Let's make sure it happens that way. So I agree with you. It'd be a constitutional crisis if, like Andrew Jackson, you just had a president totally ignoring the court. But we're not there.
But Robby, that is what J.D. Vance has already said that he wants President Trump to do. J.D. Vance has already signaled, he has said that he hopes that he will act like Andrew Jackson and saying, I don't care what the Supreme Court said. So this is the issue. So if if the judiciary does go back on various issues and say to Donald Trump, you can't do that. If Donald Trump says, well, make me, these judges work basically for Pam Bondi under the Department of Justice, and that is a concern that so many of us have.
And anyway, I don't think that, you know, you say you wanted RFK Jr. to more forcefully denounce Trump. If he does that, then they would just put someone else in that position who, wouldn't you likely to be, you know, further from your own views? Isn't it, you know, from a progressive standpoint, wouldn't you rather have RFK Jr. in there than somebody else?
I think he's made his point, and I think it's some really good points about health in America, and about prevention, and about pharmaceutical companies, and about food companies, and I would assume that if someone else had been chosen, it would have been along that line.
Yeah.
But I think it would have been a very big moral statement. We need American patriots right now to simply say that what Musk is doing and what Trump is doing in cahoots with him in terms of the takeover of these agencies is both unconstitutional, undemocratic, and un-American, and we all have to stand up and say it. And I guess, if you agreed with me, you would say it, wouldn't you?
Certainly. Well, and if Trump does things I don't think are correct, I would criticize him. I do criticize him periodically. I criticize Elon Musk periodically. When they were going through, for instance, the USAID spending, and they said, oh, we found all this, you know, spending on media. I'm like, well, that was for Politico specifically. I'm like, well, they're paying for, the government was subscribing to the product. That's not the same thing as like a direct subsidy, and I disagree with him, and I had a bunch of MAGA people screaming at me incoherently on social media for days, but that's the way I feel. So I just say what I think, but broadly I agree with the effort. I think it is very difficult to grapple with this multi-headed hydra of the federal government. I think the federal government doing so much and being so powerful and having so many agencies and so many employees is bad for efficiency, is bad for the economy of the United States of America, and I want to return more money to the people. I want to do it constitutionally and legally and through the legislative process. And I share your concerns about Elon Musk's. The criticism I agree with the most is the conflict of interest part, because it is obviously true that he has massive government contracts, and that is difficult to grapple with. That said, he acquired Twitter, and every liberal person said, oh, you fire 80% of the employees, it'll never work. He fired 80% of the employees, and it works just fine. If you could do the same thing with government, my God, the savings.
Okay.
I'm salivating. Salivating, Marianne.
There is, well, I'm glad for you that you're salivating. Hear me out. There is no democracy without a democratic process. He had promised us during the campaign that these would be.
Trump won.
No, that doesn't.
And a Republican Congress won.
Hold on. We don't democratically elect a dictator. We democratically elect a president.
I don't care. 54% of people ready. He's more popular than the first time.
You're admitting that you don't care that the basic democratic process is being dismantled here. So let me say this.
The federal bureaucracy is not the democratic process. They operate in undemocratic ways. They're not elected. They exist. There's continuity in them from one administration to the next. We're not. They are themselves not the government working to democratic accountability. We have no democratic accountability over the funding for everything that went on in Wuhan, for instance. These are all career bureaucrats doing what they want to do, contrary to the will of the American people and their elected representatives. That's what we're hollowing out.
Programs and agencies that were established by Congress. Congress is a co-equal branch of the U.S. government.
Yeah. I wish Congress felt that way.
Well, I do too, but in the opposite way of what you're saying right now. I wish they would stand up for their own power rather than surrendering it to the executive.
Well, I agree with that.
The way they are. So what happens is that if he wants to come in and make recommendations, which could not possibly be valid if he doesn't even know what these agencies do. He's not even talking to the people. He's not even researching what these.
No one knows what these agencies do, least of all the American people.
Well, if he wants to come in at the behest of the president, if a president says, this is a duly elected president, if Donald Trump says, okay, the federal workforce is too big and I'm going to handle it, I'd be actually saying fine. He said, I'm going to have a board that recommends changes. Okay, so you go back, you investigate, you talk to the inspectors general who are there, put there by Congress to oversee. You talk to them, you talk to the people in the agencies, you actually investigate, then you go to Congress, you set up commissions, and you thoughtfully and deliberately decide where you're going to cut. They are rather, by just decree, going in a matter of hours, just removing, deleting programs, deleting pages and websites, particularly areas that had to do with places where Elon Musk himself was being investigated by inspectors general. No, I'm sorry, this is not the way things are supposed to happen in a democracy. It's the way they happen in an autocracy. And this is what Donald Trump is modeling himself after, the Viktor Orbáns of the world that he thinks are such great men. He doesn't even understand that the word political strongman is not a compliment when it comes to politics. So we're going to stand up, Robby.
We're going to stand up. Well, we'll see. You let us know what you think about this subject. Are you excited for RFK Jr. to take the helm at HHS? Lots more to discuss today on Rising. Stay tuned.